don't we start with that? What is the problem with, we all came from grandparents and parents, in my case, a baby boomer. My parents lived through the Great Depression as children and grew up through it with that attitude. And my grandparents, of course, they were there long before the actual thing. They came from unbelievably large families. And in my mother's family, I think they were 7 and 5. I mean, that was between the parents,
Mm-hmm.
whereas I had 3. So
Yeah.
they would look at me and go, wow, that's a very small family.
Yes.
But I had cousins, of course, who had zip.
Yes.
So what is it about going from agrarian to mill workers to, I know my father was more successful as a businessman, but all his children had master's degrees. In other words, we went off and
Had the American dream.
Had the American dream with
That's
a lot
right.
less children. Why?
Well, there are a lot of reasons we've talked about, but one of the things that is important to remember that while you and I, were doing our benighted American thing, living the American dream, going out there and getting good jobs and having kids and raising them and being free, making our decisions, we weren't aware of some really important movements that were going on. And I think Roe versus Wade, when that decision came down, it woke a lot of us up. It was like, what happened? This isn't America. I thought I knew what America was. I'd been living here doing my thing, and all of a sudden, we have abortion on demand in America. What happened? Well, that didn't happen by accident. And what was going on at much higher levels than most of us were functioning on, there were a lot of very important decision makers and important people out there who were eugenicists. And they had made up their minds that eugenics was the way to go. And eugenics is the process of trying to build a, quote, better race of people by encouraging your good people to reproduce and discouraging lesser people from reproducing. And so the
origins through the Rockefeller Foundation of Planned Parenthood.
Exactly. Rockefeller was a primary source, but there were lots of others. And there were some very powerful families that were involved in that. And it's kind of interesting to come here to Newport and visit the houses and hear some of the stories about the sort of political agendas that these people had. They were in a position to make enormous difference. 1 or 2 people with their fortunes could move the world. And unfortunately, some of these people moved in very dangerous directions. So that eugenics and this attitude that we keep talking about, how come all of a sudden having babies is such a bad thing? It's so bad for everybody. We shouldn't be having children, overpopulate. Well, that was fed by this eugenics movement. And then it was very handy, the environmentalists are very handy to pick up on that and carry the torch, but it began and it's fundamentally still that old eugenics movement, the one that the Nazis participated in. I mean, it's all part of that old principles and philosophies that they were extolling. And so we are the beneficiaries in the negative terms of that. And I think what happened in 1973 was that the rest of us suddenly realized that huge convulsions were occurring within our culture, within our value system, in the higher levels of professional thinkers, doers, teachers. Wealthy people were funneling money, and it was being used to prime that pump. To get people to think differently about, to pull away from our Judeo-Christian values and to take on the value of eugenics. So Margaret Sanger was extolled. And I remember my daughter came home from school, and this is high school years ago, and she said, they have a whole page saying how wonderful Margaret Sanger is. In the textbook. Now, see, this was fed into the mind control, of course. And she said, and I said, well, that alarmed me. I said, what are you going to do about it? Because I'm thinking, what do we need to do about this? And she said, well, I went to the teacher and said, when we get to this section of the book, I want to give a report. I'll prepare it. I want to give a report. And what is the teacher going to say when a student comes and wants to do some work? So she said, oh, fine. And so when they got to that section of the book, my daughter came in with all the stuff about who Margaret Sanger really was, what her real agenda was, and why she was such a dangerous person, and why what she was doing was such a threat to our culture.
What about the antithesis here? In other words, Planned Parenthood, a business, a cash business. If it's not government subsidized or whatever, there's no pro bono abortions. It's a cash.
Yeah.
And it's thing, and their market, in terms of the highest number of, I'm talking, cultures now. I mean, ethnic groups, is black. I mean, they are in the black ghetto, where they are producing abortions, I believe, at like a 38%, some incredible depopulation amount. In the state of Rhode Island, I believe blacks used to be like 17, and this is like in the 70s, and Hispanics might have been like 2%. Now Hispanics have gone to 5 to 10 or 11, and they're getting close in the 2010 to matching it because blacks are going down. So Rockefeller and other groups gave these kinds of money because their point of view was we didn't want them. Okay, so many black politicians associated with particularly in the Congress, in the House of Representatives, like, why don't they turn around and say, we're the ones targeted?
Yeah.
Why isn't someone screaming it?
It is a very sad thing to me that the minority populations in this country are the targeted populations, and yet they seem to be the ones that are embracing that culture, and in the form of embracing a political entity that supports that culture. And that's a very sad thing to us. We have tried very hard at National Right to Life to reach out to the black community, and I think that by and large we haven't been able to do it in the way we want to. Blacks have twice the rate, given if you look at how many of them there are and right. what the numbers are, they have twice the rate of abortions of any other group in this country. And I know that it's a subtle racism that is driving, and yet because it is part of this old eugenics mindset and it's part of the progressive way of thinking about things, they have made people feel that this is really a gift to them, that somehow they're being offered something that benefits them to kill their own children. Because we have sold this idea that having these children is not the goal, they're not gifts, and you're better off getting rid of them, and aren't you happy that we're providing you with the ability to get rid of them? And it is sad the way they have bought into that. Now I think there have been, recently there's some movement in the black community, and I think it has to come from the black community. What we concluded was that until they recognize that they're victims, until they begin to speak out and try to protect themselves, and until the ministers and the politicians turn and look at their own community and say, look guys, wake up, we have a problem here, it's not going to happen. We're not going to be able to impose it on them from outside. And I'm gratified by Martin Luther King Jr.'s niece, Dr. King, who, Alveda King, who has been out there working very hard to try to point out to blacks that her uncle's position was pro-life. We've forgotten that, in all of the hysteria, that he was opposed to abortion, and that it's not in the best interest of blacks. So, I applaud every outreach that helps to educate and bring the truth. It's a very sad reality.